Billy Wilder's last film, Sabrina, was a beautifully photographed black and white romance that paid homage to the sure-handed work of his classy mentor, Ernst Lubitsch. But in The 7-Year Itch, Wilder would shoot in widescreen Technicolor and squeeze out plenty of boob jokes.
Wilder had also left Paramount after making Sabrina, so this is clearly a man who's single and ready to mingle.
Welcome to the Filmographers podcast, the show where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. This season, of course, we're giving the close-up to the one and only Billy Wilder. I'm Keir Graff, and with me, as always, is Michael Moreci, the Marilyn Monroe to my Tom Ewell. Mike, what's your one-sentence summary of The 7-Year Itch?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm Marilyn and you get Tom Ewell, but I thank you for the compliment. Okay, The 7-Year Itch. When a married man is left alone for more than just a few hours, his fidelity is tempted by, of all people, the sexiest of sex pots, Marilyn Monroe, who just happens to be the girl next door.
I remember when we were doing 7-Year Itch, she came down the staircase, we were rehearsing, and she wore a nightgown, and it was kind of falling way out and falling straight down, like the Niagara Falls. And I went up there and he says, "Marilyn, are you wearing a brassiere?" And she stared at me, like I accused her of being a forger. A brassiere? And she picked up my hand and put it on top of those two marble edifices. And I apologized. Never again did I dare to ask, but there was pride, the integrity of that thing.
While filming Ace in the Hole, Wilder had bragged to the LA Times, quote, "I always make things very tough on myself by not going out and buying a successful stage play or novel, but starting, instead, from scratch," end quote. But after Ace tanked, he reversed course, working exclusively from proven properties. Stalag 17 and Sabrina, which we discussed in our last two episodes, were both successful Broadway plays, and both movies were hits. His new approach was paying off. And with The 7-Year Itch, he would be adapting the biggest success yet. But his interest in the property predated Sabrina.
That's right, Keir. The play of The 7-Year Itch, directed by John Gerstad and written by George Axelrod, opened on November 20th, 1952 at the Fulton Theater and was a big hit. Movie studios showed interest right away, but they backed off after the Production Code Administration, now directed by Jeffrey Sherlock, said they would never approve a film version because adultery could not be the subject for comedy or laughter. But as we know, if there's one person who thought adultery was indeed hilarious and was never afraid of industry censors, it was Billy Wilder.
Hollywood Reporter referred to the play as Lust Weekend, which may have piqued his interest. Or maybe it was a simpler attraction. Describing his interest in the property, Wilder told biographer Maurice Zolotow, quote, "The girl keeps her underwear in the Frigidaire. Wow!"
That's a great quote. Sources disagree slightly on what happened next. Ed Sykoff says Wilder pursued the project on his own, while Gene Phillips says Axelrod's agent, Irving Swifty Lazar, made contact with Wilder. However it happened, Wilder began negotiating for the rights in January 1953, and he had a novel, an extremely commercial idea. He wanted to make 3 films at the same time, one in English, one in French, and one in Spanish, casting famous stars from each country in the lead roles. Throw in some hobbits, and he's a regular Peter Jackson.
But Marilyn Monroe's agent, Charles Feldman, also wanted the property for her. He had a track record of success in stage to screen, having produced the film version of A Streetcar Named Desire. And Wilder was on the very short list of directors Monroe was willing to work with. Feldman proposed to Wilder that they buy it together. Even better, Feldman said he'd put up the cash. Wilder agreed. Axelrod sold them the rights for $250,000 with the important stipulation that the movie could not be released while the play was still running. Wilder would direct, co-write, and co-produce with Feldman for $250,000, the same salary he had received from Paramount for Sabrina.
Putting the actual movie together took some time. Wilder, of course, had to shoot Sabrina in fall of 1953. Itch was still going strong on Broadway, and he slipped in references to 7-Year Itch in 2 scenes of Sabrina. In the first one, Linus Larrabee tells his secretary, "I want 2 tickets to the 7-Year Itch. But when he and Sabrina stay in, he tells the secretary she can use the tickets herself. The next day, she says, "I'm sorry, I had a very bad night last night. I used your tickets and took my mother." The implication being that her mother was shocked by what she saw.
Things really started moving on the 7-year itch in the spring of 1954, but the process wasn't like it had been for most of Wilder's career.
He had recently ended his relationship with Paramount Pictures over a change they made to the German version of Stalag 17. To avoid offending German moviegoers, Paramount execs had decided to make the spy in the barracks Polish, not German. Not only did that make no sense to the story, it was insulting to Wilder, whose mother, stepfather, and grandmother had been murdered by the Nazis. Wilder was enraged, and after making 17 movies in 18 years with Paramount, he decided not to renew his contract.
Wilder, always keen to gain more control over his work, also had an eye on greater independence. The studio era, in which top talent always worked under contract to the major Hollywood studios, was ending, and creatives were beginning to assert more control over their work and hoping to benefit financially, too. Wilder threw in his lot with Allied Artists, the reincarnated Poverty Row studio monogram that had attracted John Huston and William Wyler, too. Wilder would now be an independent producer-director with even more control than he had enjoyed at Paramount, and he had been a very big deal there. Of course, now that he was no longer a contract player, every detail of every production was up for negotiation.
We don't usually share the blow-by-blow of how films are financed, but we're going to go into a little bit of detail here. In May 1954, Wilder signed with Allied Artists, but it would be a while before he actually made a movie for them. He already had a deal in place with Warner's for his next movie about the spirit of St. Louis. And for 7-year itch, well, Marilyn Monroe was under contract to 20th Century Fox, so he had to make a picture there. And Wilder's innovative idea of shooting 3 simultaneous versions in 3 different languages, well, we'll never know whether it was a stroke of genius or a sign of madness. Wilder fought for them, but lost.
According to Ed Sykov in his book On Sunset Boulevard, quote, "Under the Fox deal, $500,000 went to the Feldman Group and Billy Wilder, plus money to make the film, plus Monroe, plus distribution prints and advertising. Fox got the gross distributor's proceeds up to $3.2 million. Above that, money went first to pay the costs of foreign dubbing, after which 60% went to Fox and 40% to the Feldman Group. Of that 40%, Feldman was allowed to reimburse itself for the cost of the property, the $255,000, as well as all payments to Wilder and Axelrod that weren't reimbursed by Fox. Wilder got 50% of the balance. If there did happen to be a French version later, Billy would get an additional $50,000. The studio system was dead, and this is what took its place." End quote.
Complex. And they called it progress. Now that was all squared away, Billy Wilder needed one more thing: a co-writer. Once again, Billy Wilder needs a co-writer. If he had just stuck to the one, Keir.
He had the best.
He did.
And the great success of Monroe, I think, was that she did not infuriate the female. By that I mean, if I told my wife after I worked or saw a picture with Monroe, let's say, she said, "My God, I'm crazy about her," she says, she would understand it. But if I told her, "Boy, God, do I wish I could spend the night with Farrah Fawcett, Major," she would hit me in the mouth.
Another film, another co-writer. I feel like we should have an in memoriam segment for all the writers Billy Wilder burned through. The great Charles Brackett, of course, and Raymond Chandler on Double Indemnity.
Richard L. Breen and Robert Harari, who helped out with A Foreign Affair, and D.M. Marshman on Sunset Boulevard.
Walter Newman and Lesser Samuels on Ace in the Hole.
And Samuel Taylor and Ernest Lehman on Sabrina. Although Taylor walked off and Lehman had a nervous breakdown. At this point, writers were probably having nervous breakdowns before they worked with Wilder. The phone rings, it's Wilder, and they start crying uncontrollably. Keir, which poor, unfortunate bastard was next?
Well, Mike, Wilder wanted to work with the playwright, George Axelrod. Axelrod was a pro who claimed to have written more than 400 radio and TV scripts, so he'd been around the block. He also idolized Wilder. He said Wilder was his first choice, and when Wilder first made contact, it was like getting a telephone call from God.
Wow, an Old Testament fire and brimstone god for sure.
At their first in-person meeting in New York during May 1954, Wilder seemed intent on establishing the pecking order. Axelrod brought along the play script, saying, quite reasonably, "I thought we might use this as a guide." Wilder took the script and dropped it on the floor, saying, "Fine, we'll use it as a doorstop." But Axelrod didn't take the bait. He didn't even seem offended. He said, "For Billy, I had awe. I didn't stand up to him." He also said, "He sees the worst in everybody, but he sees it funny." And despite that first encounter, Wilder did reassure Axelrod the structure of his play would remain intact, and that he would use as much of the original dialogue as he could get away with.
Which would not be much, as it turned out, but that wasn't Wilder's fault. Joe Breen, Wilder's old foe at the Production Code Administration, had been replaced by Jeffrey Sherlock, who took his censorship very seriously. Adultery was the entire point of the play, but Sherlock continued to insist it was not a suitable subject for a movie.
Wilder couldn't say he wasn't warned.
As Axelrod worked with Wilder over the summer, they decided the only way around the code was to eliminate the explicit acknowledgement of adultery and substitute fantasy sequences where Richard only imagines he seduces the girl. A bit like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty if Mitty's only dream in life was to bang the hot girl upstairs. You'd probably need a new title as well for that.
I nominate The Secret Wife of Walter Mitty.
That's a good one. Good. Well done, man.
Thank you.
Wilder was desperate, though, to include some sign that sex had actually occurred and came up with a Lubitchian touch. A maid cleaning the guy's apartment finds a hairpin in his sheets, letting the audience know that the deed was done. But Darryl F. Zanuck of Fox refused. And so the script proceeded as a movie about adultery with literally no adultery in it.
Honestly, given that it's a farce, I kind of think that's what saves it, allowing the character of Richard to be the butt of the joke instead of a sexual predator, but we'll discuss. Wilder and Axelrod worked together throughout the summer, and Axelrod recalled that as they drove back and forth between Wilder's offices at Fox and Warner's, two offices, two lots, they would often stop to shop at boutiques and antique shops and bookstores and galleries so Wilder could shop. Wilder bought lots of skinny neckties, even though he never wore a tie, which reminds me of his European directorial debut, Mauvais Grain, which has a car thief who compulsively steals and exchanges neckties, sometimes suggestively, with other men. Anyway, on August 10th, 1954, Wilder sent the final script to Sherlock for approval.
I don't believe you at all on that. It's not true.
Believe it, Mike. Final! Loyal listeners know that Wilder rarely started shooting with the final script. In fact, he often shot during the day and wrote at night. That had produced great results over many films, but it almost all came crashing down with Sabrina, in which Wilder fell so far behind, he invented reasons to delay filming so he and Lehman could catch up. He vowed never to repeat that experience. We'll see if he keeps that promise in later episodes.
Sherlock of the PCA made minor cuts, like a line from the girl to Richard, quote, "I feel so sorry for you with those hot pants." But Wilder had still managed to sneak in some risque lines throughout, at least for the time being.
Seems to be stuck.
That's silly. Just give it a good yank.
This never happened before.
Thanks for joining us for Season 2 of the Filmographers podcast, our deep dive on the legendary writer-director Billy Wilder.
We're grateful that more and more of you are choosing to support us on Patreon, and every month we show our appreciation by releasing ad-free versions of our main episodes on that platform, plus monthly episodes that are only available to our paid supporters. This month, our special episode is about Sidney Pollack's 1995 remake of Sabrina.
Instead of Audrey Hepburn, William Holden, and Humphrey Bogart, this remake has Julia Ormond, Greg Kinnear, and Harrison Ford. Is it any good? You'll have to listen to find out.
These exclusive episodes are available to paid supporters at any level. If you've been thinking about upgrading your membership, now is the time. Just visit patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast to show your support.
Once again, that's patreon.com/the Filmographers podcast.
Thank you so much for your support. We do it for you, and we couldn't do it without you. And thank you to our newest Patreon supporters, Matt, David, Mike, Michael, and Ellis. Welcome to the Filmographers community. With Marilyn Monroe in place as the girl, that's right, the object of desire in the 7-Year Itch goes through the entire story without a name. The next order of business was deciding who would play Richard, the horny ex-bachelor who really, really wants to lay her. Zanuck wanted Ewell, the actor who had originated the role on Broadway, figuring, quote, he knows where all the laughs are. And it's not a bad thought, except for the fact that Monroe was a capital M, capital S movie star. And even though Ewell won a Tony for the stage version, he was best known to moviegoers for a 1949 supporting role in Adam's Rib.
Wilder initially agreed to cast him, but then had second thoughts. In August, Variety printed a rumor that Jack Lemmon was up for the role, which of course would have worked wonderfully and been an amazing jumpstart to their artistically fruitful relationship. But there's no truth to that rumor. Walter Matthau did audition, reading opposite Gena Rowlands, and he even told one writer Wilder had assured him he almost certainly had the part. And late in life, Wilder told Cameron Crowe he tried to convince Fox to give it to Matthau, but apparently that was just another Wilder story. Matthau was even less known than Ewell, and it seems Wilder wasn't ready to take the risk.
If he couldn't have Ewell, Zanuck definitely wanted a star to play opposite Monroe. He pushed for William Holden, but even though Wilder was a friend and a fan, Wilder didn't think Holden was right for the part. He wanted Gary Cooper. When they couldn't agree, Jimmy Stewart was briefly attached, but couldn't get out of shooting The Man from Laramie and had to withdraw. In the end, Zanuck and Wilder circled back to Ewell, figuring he had at least proved he could play the part.
Evelyn Keyes, ex-wife of John Huston and allegedly a former lover of Wilder's, was cast as Helen, Richard's wife, and Robert Strauss, who played Animal in Stalag 17, came on to provide comic relief as maintenance man Krahulik. Kevin Lawley, author of Wilder Times, The Life of Billy Wilder, notes that Wilder had a weakness for over-the-top actors in supporting roles, and Strauss's casting more or less proved that point, as does the fact that the role of Krahulik didn't exist in the play and was created for the film.
Yeah, pretty broad. You might not know the name Robert Strauss, but if you see him, you will remember him.
Oh, yeah.
The 7-Year Itch is essentially a two-hander, and the only really important roles are the girl and Richard. But adding some fun minor roles was one way Wilder could ensure people didn't perceive him as merely filming the play. He also added a fun bit with Doro Mirande as a nudist waitress at a vegetarian restaurant. She would return in 2 other films. And Oscar Homolka as a psychiatrist, one of Wilder's favorite professional targets. Homolka played Professor Gurkakov in Howard Hawks' Ball of Fire, on which Wilder was an understudy director. And, fun fact, the nurse who makes a pass at Richard in one of his fantasies was played by Carolyn Jones, better known for her role as Morticia Addams.
Cinematographer Milton Krasner had experience with both CinemaScope and Technicolor from shooting 3 Coins in the Fountain, and Doane Harrison, who had helped Wilder on set and in the editing room since The Major and the Minor, was promoted to associate producer this time around. The score would be composed by Alfred Newman, head of the Fox Music Department. Unfortunately, no relation to the more famous Alfred E. Newman. Fun fact, Keir, Newman was the most Oscar-nominated composer until John Williams broke his record in 2006.
Fantastic fact. And who's heard of Newman? Start a fan club.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to lose to someone, I guess lose to John Williams. Keir, longtime listeners know that when you're not podcasting, you're a prolific author. Last year, you came out with 2 books, and you already have another one on the way.
That's right, Mike. On March 3rd, I Did Not Kill My Husband will go on sale. It's the 5th book I've written with my writing partner, Linda Jaffe Hull, under the pen name Linda Keir.
I Did Not Kill My Husband. That title sounds strangely familiar.
It should. It's an inversion of Richard Kimball's famous line in The Fugitive as he tries to find the one-armed man who killed his beloved wife. Our book is a thriller that pays homage to Andrew Davis's modern classic, only our wrongly accused protagonist is a social media influencer whose platform is all about what she calls ethical gold digging. And since she already admitted she married her husband for his money, no one believes she didn't kill him to cash out his insurance policy.
So no train crash, no one-armed man, no Tommy Lee Jones?
Nope. But I have no doubt film fans will enjoy the way we tip our hats to those famous story elements.
I can't wait to read it, unless they make it into a movie. Then I can just watch it.
From your mouth to Hollywood's ears, Mike. In the meantime, listeners, you can pre-order I Did Not Kill My Husband wherever books are sold. If you want a signed copy, order it from the Filmographers' favorite bookstore, Exile in Bookville. Visit exileinbookville.com. With the budget set at $1.7 million, of which Marilyn Monroe would be paid $100,000 and Ewell $25,000, The 7-Year Itch was set to begin production in fall of 1955. Cameras rolled on September 1st on location at Yankee Stadium for a scene that did not make it into the finished picture. Wilder had a love-hate relationship with location shooting, saying, "Personally, I prefer to shoot in the studio because I can control it. And then there's the bother of working with strangers." The lack of control was not theoretical.
Part of the problem was the tension between making a movie and promoting it. With Marilyn Monroe filming on location in New York, Harry Brand, Fox's head of publicity, knew he had a golden opportunity, and he was determined to milk it for all it was worth, regardless of the impact on filming. After Monroe arrived on September 9th, Wilder began shooting exteriors at a rented apartment on East 63rd Street. Even though there were barricades at both ends of the street, the crowds were so loud that Wilder quickly realized he would have to loop all the audio in the studio.
Then it got even worse. On September 11th, Wilder prepared to shoot the famous scene in which the girl cools her lady parts in the breeze blowing out of a subway grate. He had chosen to do it at 2 a.m., figuring the location, 51st and Lexington, would be deserted. But Brand leaked the place and time to the papers. A crowd of thousands watched, whooping and cheering lustily each time the breeze, manufactured by technicians underneath the sidewalk, lifted her skirt. While Wilder shot 15 takes, they chanted, "Higher! Higher!"
And one of the people in the crowd happened to be Monroe's husband, former Yankee star Joe DiMaggio. They had only been married 8 months, but already the marriage was on the rocks.
7-year itch? Try 7 months.
Yeah, DiMaggio was already having a tough time being married to someone more popular than him. Not only that, he had been raised in a socially conservative Catholic household, and he still saw the world much the same way. In the jeering, cheering crowd, he seethed to see his wife on such public display. Columnist Walter Winchell, who allegedly had dragged DiMaggio there in the first place, said the Joltin' Joe wore a look of death. Very dramatic.
He was an angry man.
He was, very serious dude. When a friend reportedly asked, "Joe, what can you expect when you marry a whore?" And that's a quote, DiMaggio walked up to Monroe, whispered something in her ear, and stalked off the set. When Marilyn got back to her room at the St. Regis Hotel, where much of the cast and crew were staying, their argument was overheard by Milton Krasner in his room next door.
DiMaggio left for LA the next day. Monroe's hairstylist said she saw bruises on Monroe's shoulders, presumably left by DiMaggio. And Monroe biographer Fred Lawrence Giles wrote that, quote, "Within hours after the famous scene was shot, the marriage was over." Friends told DiMaggio he had overreacted, but he answered, "I regret it, but I cannot help it."
Yeah, it's sad, tragic stuff, and just a sliver of Monroe's disastrous and just awful romances.
Yeah, very, very sad. Now, there are 2 ironies to all of this. One, in the movie, the girl's supposed to be cooling herself on a hot night, but the wind that normally rises from subway grates is hot.
Well, that explains why she keeps her underpants in the icebox. Duh.
It has a certain logic. Unfortunately for Monroe, it was a cold night, and she actually caught a chill that left her feeling crummy for days afterward. 2, the footage shot that night just didn't work. The chaos on the street didn't help, but the real problem was that Monroe's skirt blew up so far past her waist they couldn't use it without getting into trouble with the censors. The script only said, quote, "A subway train roars by, the breeze from it blows up her skirt a little," end quote. So for the scene used in the movie, they reconstructed the location on the Fox lot and blew up Monroe's skirt just enough to be titillating, not enough to be obscene.
But they did use that original footage in publicity stills, no doubt approved by good old Harry Brand. If you compare those clips to the actual movie, you will see the big difference. This movie may not have been one of Wilder's best, but this image became undeniably one of the defining images of the 1950s.
Wilder later regretted the fact that they didn't build the entire publicity campaign around that image.
Oh, do you feel the breeze from the subway? Isn't it delicious?
Sort of cools the ankles, doesn't it?
Now, to begin with, the whole thing was a fake because really the wind is very hot when you stand on that girl. But we just used it anyway. And we did it. But we did the closer shot where the wind blows up the dress. We did it in the studio. We staged. I mean, we found a piece of New York street. We had a picture made of that, and then we did it in the studio. That was the whole trick, and it became a very famous landmark in pictures.
In mid-September, cast and crew returned to Hollywood, where the rest of the shoot would take place on a set on the Fox lot. Trying to make the movie's apartment more expansive than the play's, art directors Lyle Wheeler and George Davis included a kitchen, bedroom, and a patio. And then, of course, there's the true-to-New York detail of a staircase that ends at the ceiling, but that holds the promise the girl will somehow descend from above.
And what a girl she was. Marilyn Monroe had an undeniable magnetic screen personality, but getting those performances on film was not always easy and would get more and more difficult as her career went on. To be fair to her, she was having a rough time of it. Already suffering from what might now be diagnosed as anxiety, she was depressed over the failure of her second marriage and self-medicating with sleeping pills and booze. She arrived late on set, sometimes seeming groggy or dazed.
She also struggled to memorize her lines and to deliver them to her own or Wilder's satisfaction. One crew member reported that she needed 15 to 18 takes on every single shot, which is a lot. She also brought her own drama coach, Natasha Lytess, who was always in her eye line off camera and to whom Monroe looked for approval as much as Wilder. The Monroe-Lytess relationship is fascinating and could be the subject of an entire episode. They had lived together. They were even rumored to have been lovers, although the relationship had naturally been strained by Monroe's marriage to DiMaggio. By the time of the 7-Year Itch, Monroe was starting to cut Lytess out of her personal life and would soon replace her professionally with Paula Strasberg, wife of Lee Strasberg, founder of the Actors Studio. Monroe moved on, but Lytess could not. When Monroe's lawyer told her to stop bothering his client, she told him, quote, "My only protection in the world is Marilyn Monroe. I created this girl. I fought for her. I am her private property. She knows that. Her faith and security are mine," end quote. Mike, it was messy.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a quote from David Bowie in Labyrinth, like, worship me, do as I say, and I will be your slave. It's like nonsense,
Yeah, or maybe something from Single White Female. I don't know.
Yeah. Could be. Yeah, messy is, boy, it's one word for it. But if you think this is bad, just wait till we get to Some Like It Hot, because that is, whew.
Yes. And again, as with all things involving Monroe, it is complicated, but a train wreck no matter how you look at it.
Correct. Train wreck here is the apt word. Now, it was no wonder directors were not fans of having Lytess around. Apparently, in Monroe's first scene in the Asphalt Jungle, which was her first film with Lytess on set, you can see her look at Lytess for approval. With all of this going on October 21st, the production was 9 days behind schedule. There had been minor delays due to weather in New York, but most of the delays were due to Monroe. When news broke of her divorce from DiMaggio, she needed a whole week off, which, again, is understandable, but still.
Wilder even found himself waxing nostalgic about Humphrey Bogart, who had been a bully and an absolute bastard to work with on Sabrina. At least Bogart was there on time, he mused, and he was there all day. Principal photography wrapped on November 4th, 1954, 13 days over the 35-day schedule and more than $1 million over budget. The film was rushed into post-production, but thanks to Doane Harrison's meticulous planning and an able assist from editor Hugh Fowler, the rough cut was assembled in record time.
Sometime in early November, Axelrod traveled to LA, saw the rough cut, and liked it. He may have been Wilder's most agreeable writing partner. We found him, Keir.
And they only did one together.
Yeah, maybe Wilder needed the conflict. This guy's too agreeable. Off he goes. Daryl Zanuck liked it too, but being Zanuck, he had lots of thoughts. Apparently, he summoned Wilder for a midnight screening, and after they watched the movie, he pontificated for 2 hours, which is longer than the goddamn movie, going on and on about ways the movie could be better. Wilder finally ended the lecture by delivering the perfect line. "I'm sorry, Mr. Zanuck. I have to leave. I have a breakfast appointment."
You come at the king, you best not miss.
No, and even if you do miss, Wilder probably still get you on the rebound. Keir, do you know who didn't like the rough cut?
I'm going to say the PCA.
You're correct. For starters, the PCA did insist on some minor cuts, including references to glands in early. God, why?
So naughty.
Why? Yeah. Goodness, I don't get it. But there was, it gets referenced in an early scene between Richard and his wife, and some shots in the subway grate scene. Those are the cuts. But another movies and moral organization, the Catholic League of Decency, also weighed in. They didn't have any actual power over Fox, but studios routinely screened movies for them, and their recommendations held a lot of sway with not only Catholics, but lots of other moviegoers too. Remember, there was no official rating system in place yet, so people who were worried they might be offended sometimes trusted the Legion of Decency to be offended for them.
Legion of Decency, lamest superhero team up ever.
Yeah. The worst and most boring. During post-production, Thomas Little, head of the Legion of Decency, and Keir, I just cannot believe that's their actual name. Like, God. Anyway, Little objected to a scene in which the plumber helping the girl get her toe unstuck from the faucet drops his wrench, then fishes around in the sudsy bathtub to find it. Wilder, though, didn't want to lose it. But the scene had been improvised on set and wasn't in the script that had been approved by the PCA, so he couldn't claim it was essential to the story. Reluctantly, he agreed to cut it.
Wilder shot retakes for every film, and The 7-Year Itch was no exception. When Monroe finished the last of her retakes on January 11th, 1955, the film officially wrapped. The wrap party was attended by Hollywood royalty that included Gary Cooper, William Holden, Jimmy Stewart, and their spouses, as well as Claudette Colbert and Doris Day. Even Bogart and Bacall showed up, which, again, is astonishing given Bogart's behavior on Sabrina.
Wilder was an actor's director, and most of them loved him for it. Despite what she'd been through and despite what she'd put him through, Monroe loved working with Billy Wilder and told Axelrod, quote, "Billy's a wonderful director. I want him to direct me again. but he's doing the Lindbergh story next, and he won't let me play Lindbergh. that's a nice one.
Yeah, I mean, that's Wilder level humor there. Nice job, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Months before the film's release, she told Edward R. Murrow, quote, "One of the best parts I've ever had is in The 7-Year Itch. I knew when Billy Wilder wanted me for the part that it would be very important for my career. Billy Wilder is one of the best directors I have ever worked with. A good director contributes a lot when he is with you every moment on the set, helping you with your performance. I enjoy doing comedies, but I would like to do dramatic parts too." The plot of The 7-Year Itch relies on the premise that, in the sweltering heat of a Manhattan summer, the men send their wives and children to the country and then pretend they're bachelors for the next 3 months. A very dated intro added for the movie makes the case that this has been going on since Indians lived on Manhattan.
The movie really starts when Richard Sherman puts his wife Helen and son Ricky on a train to Maine from Penn Station. Richard works for a paperback publisher that repackages classic novels with racy covers and titles like Little Women's Secret of a Girl's Dormitory, which was a real thing, by the way. They actually sold very well. That's amazing.
When Richard comes home, he meets the girl, who again is never named, and who has sublet the apartment upstairs for the summer. She's a model whose main gig is a TV commercial for Dazzledent toothpaste. Richard's imagination is also piqued when he learns that she posed for an art picture in a photo book of which he just so happens to have a copy.
Basically, what follows is Richard's war with himself between his desperate desire to seduce the girl and his white-knuckle determination to remain faithful to his wife. His fantasies of seduction play out in parodies of other plays and movies, which allows Wilder to poke fun at a seduction scene from the William Inge play Picnic, shortly to become a movie starring William Holden, the beach scene in From Here to Eternity, directed by Wilder's old friend Fred Zinnemann, the use of Rachmaninoff in Brief Encounter, directed by David Lean.
The girl seems happy enough to flirt, noting that one advantage of a married man is that he can't propose marriage. But she seems less attracted to Richard than to his air conditioning. When she proposes sleeping over, it's so she can escape her hot second-floor apartment.
Richard's fantasies take a darker turn when he imagines his wife in Maine may be getting up to the very same thing he's hoping to get up to. Then he becomes terrified she's found out and hallucinates that she returns with a gun and, perhaps in a nod to Wilder's own Double Indemnity, shoots him dead.
Richard finally sees the light. Without having gotten anything more than a couple of kisses, he decides to bury himself not in the bosom of the girl, but his family. Leaving his air-conditioned apartment to the girl, he announces he's joining his family in Maine. In a not quite believable final encounter, the girl admits she is drawn to Richard because he's, quote, the shy, gentle type, tender and kind of sweet. If I were your wife, I'd be jealous of you.
Good old Rachmaninoff. The second piano concerto. Never misses.
Mike. Audiences in 1955 laughed long and hard at The 7-Year Itch. Does it hold up?
It's hard to say whether it holds up or not. I have to be frank from the start. I don't care that much for The 7-Year Itch. I feel like the premise stretches so thin that I find myself, I don't want to say bored, because I'm never bored, because Monroe is so good. You know, her on the screen is pretty magnetic, no matter what she's doing. So I wasn't bored, but I also didn't find myself that interested. There's so many things in the movie that just fundamentally, to me, regardless of the period and how much it holds up or not, just don't work. Like Monroe, you know, the girl, you know, potentially hooking up with Richard is so unbelievable to me, so kind of preposterous that it's, you know, it's hard for you to even fathom it. I found, you know, we'll get to Technicolor, I'm sure, in time, and the use of color just in general. But I just found so much of it, the foundation, to be kind of creaky. And I guess maybe the thing that works, and I guess you're right to ask if it holds up, because the thing that works about it is that it does have it's naughty, for the time. There's a naughtiness to it of adultery, and just Marilyn Monroe's sexiness is a scandal in and of itself, so to use it in this context is kind of explosive, and I get it. So holding up, I don't think so. It seems kind of pat, and seems like you're kind of wondering ultimately almost like what the big deal is. I mean, yes, adultery is a big deal, but like we live in a culture of far worse, of websites designed specifically for this reason. It's, crazy. So holding up, probably not, in terms of like what audience responded to was, I think, in part that naughtiness, and it's a little bit risque and all that, but also packaged in a comedy, so you can do it. But I think my main problem is that fundamentally, I just don't enjoy the movie. I think it's like a 35-minute affair that's stretched well beyond what its runtime ought to be. But what about you, Keir?
I saw this once a long, long time ago, and then I didn't see it again until watching it a couple of times for the podcast. And the first time, I just didn't care for it. I was uninterested. I thought it was really dated and dumb. And I liked it a little more now. And I think I've said this in previous episodes. I have Billy Wilder syndrome now, because it's sort of like whatever he does, I'm sort of interested in it. And of course, because we're studying it, we're paying careful attention. Right. But I do think that aside, I think I found more to appreciate about it this time, in that, Ewell is an able performer. I mean, he did this role on Broadway a zillion times. He won a Tony for it. Although that version, we should say, was apparently, I didn't have time to read the play, but apparently in that version, it's quite clear that they've been hooking up, and it is an affair. It's much, that's why the secretary's wife in Sabrina, or the secretary's mom in Sabrina, was scandalized by taking her mom to the play, because it was a dirtier play. And so it's kind of interesting that to make it, I guess in New York on Broadway, it's kind of like, well, it's more an audience of sophisticates, or it's tourists who are coming to be titillated. But Hollywood is saying, well, if we're going to take this nationwide, we got to clean it up. But I do think that Ewell is solid, and I kind of like it because he's the butt of the joke. In a way, you could almost play it like, we talked about Walter Mitty, but you could almost play it as like the girl is a figment of his imagination. Maybe that's why she's not named, Maybe there's a version in which she doesn't exist and it's all in his head. And Monroe, as you say, has absolute star quality. I never thought of myself as somebody who's like a Marilyn Monroe fan. It kind of just feels like, I don't know, it feels like hokey to be a Marilyn Monroe fan or something like that. And yet every time I see her in a film, I'm just like, man, you can't take your eyes off her. She just had it. She had that movie star thing. And even though the role is pretty demeaning to her in a lot of ways, somehow she elevates it. And it's objectively stupid that she would be interested in this schmo. And yet the way she just plays it straight, and I don't know, you don't like end up feeling really bad for her. And then at some point you do kind of start thinking like, well, wait a minute. She's kind of naive about him, but she really is more interested in his air conditioning, which again is fairly funny.
Yeah.
All in all, I would say that this is, it's definitely middle of the pack Wilder. It's not bad. It's definitely not great. It's like, okay. Like I enjoyed watching it just fine. I don't think it rewards richer study. I mean, the story behind it, as we've elucidated on this episode, is fairly interesting. But I do think that the behind the scenes stuff is actually ultimately more interesting than what's in the movie. But I can't deny that, I chuckled throughout.
Yeah. I mean, there's some laughs, and it's fine. It's, I guess, in a way, we've talked about this, this middle pack, I think it was Psychoff who called it his, duck and run period. And of the movies, Stalag, Sabrina, and now 7 Year Itch, it's probably my least favorite, although which is kind of saying a lot because I don't really care for Stalag either. Sabrina is elevated by the star power and cast and the wonderful, beautiful shooting, the cinematography. There's so much that you can really look at and appreciate. But Yeah, 7 Year Itch just doesn't have it for me. There's just really like Monroe's fine, but I'm with you. It's kind of almost it's hard to wrap your head around her as more than just an icon. You forget that she was a performer. I have the same relationship with like James Dean.
Yeah.
He's exists in this like space where it's just he's a somebody smoking a cigarette on painted on a wall in a shitty diner. Like and like you see him in Portillo's enough, and like you kind of you don't see the forest for the trees anymore. And I think the same thing of Marilyn Monroe. So when you see him, it's almost like you're just kind of so far removed because an icon is just static, and but they were flesh and blood, and she is good in this, but I can't really connect with her that deeply, and that's kind of challenging. Although I will say Some Like It Hot is a different story altogether. So I'm with you. It's fine, but it's kind of disappointing, and I'm looking forward to Wilder pulling himself out of the molasses of this period because it is wearing thin.
One of the things that does make it seem dated, I think, is the Technicolor. It's interesting that a black and white film could feel less dated, but there's something, we've talked repeatedly about the beauty of the cinematography in Sabrina, and it is just a gorgeous film, and it feels so, I don't know, it ages wonderfully well. And I think sometimes the earlier color films, this is not particularly early color, but like, I like Technicolor in this nostalgic way, but it feels, for some reason, the broadness of the humor and the vividness of the color do make it seem more dated somehow than the black and white elegance of Sabrina. And it's very interesting. I read obviously quite a bit about this movie in preparing the script for this episode, and very few people talked about Wilder's decision to go in color again. I found almost nothing on it, and I find that very strange because we do know that after making Emperor Waltz, which was vividly in Technicolor, it was vividly color, Wilder didn't like the look of it and went right back to shooting in black and white and continued shooting in black and white until this movie, after which he's going to go back to shooting in black and white.
Yeah, there's something about it, and I wish, I can pull out some Pierre Bogdanovich quotes because he spoke eloquently about the power of black and white, the dignity, I guess, of it. And, you go back to Lubitsch, for example, and his comedies, his musicals, his comedy musicals. He was always doing pretty crude stuff, especially for the time, like very double entendres and this underlying, just sneaky, sexy humor that we both adore. But somehow there's a dignity and a class to his films that I think Wilder was able to capture and then maintain. But I can't blame it all on color, but there's something about the garishness of color. And this is a little bit more bawdy of a movie, for obvious reasons, that like the combination of the both just feels like you're losing a little bit of that dignity and class and style. And not only does it look just better, I'm a firm believer in black and white, but like, I don't know, you just lose, I feel like, so much tonally, aesthetically, and what you get in its place in the example of 7 Year Itch, I just don't like the look. I don't like the feel of the movie. And I had the same response to Emperor Waltz, which also had Bing Crosby, which I also don't like.
Yeah. One of the other reasons this movie just may be a little bit flatter, and we kind of alluded to this, there's very little friction between Wilder and Axelrod, and friction being the operative word. Of course, when Wilder talked about ending his relationship with Charles Brackett, he has that quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says basically it's like a box of matches. You drag the match across the strip again and again, and then one day there's nothing there and the match doesn't spark. And so Wilder may have been a prick to many of his co-writers, but he clearly thrived on contesting things and that kind of exchange of maybe physical blows sometimes, as well as just verbal daggers. And Axelrod idolized Wilder and didn't really seem to fight him on anything. I found another quote from Wilder from an introduction to a book called The Life and Death of a Screenwriter. And says, my theory about collaborators is that if there are two guys that think the same way, that have the same background, that have the same political convictions and all the rest, it's terrible. It's not collaboration. It's like pulling on one end of the rope. You need an opponent there, and then you'll have it stretched and tense. And clearly he didn't have that in this one.
And certainly, throughout his career, he definitely had the tension. But what's funny though is also, and I'm probably making a leap here. Maybe this is disconnected, but I think it's still an important point that like one of the problems I have with 7-Year Itch and Stalag is they're generally conflict-free movies. Stalag had, who's the spy and setting William Holden up for like, the patsy for a moment, then he's figuring it out. But it was stretched very, very thin with a lot of, like we talked about before, just a lot of skits in between where William Holden's not even in the movie. And I didn't enjoy that. I found the humor to be way too broad. Whereas here, it's not quite the same, but there is this level of lacking conflict because the conflict is just within Richard, it's just within his character. Will he or won't he, or will he try, will he attempt? And they stretch that out for like 90 minutes, and it's not the most, again, maybe a product of its time and it works, but now it's just not the most captivating premise, and the conflict really lacks. And the girl doesn't really offer much in terms of like conflict either, because she just seems to be like, whatever will happen, I'm just kind of here to exist. That's why it feels like, you say this, she can almost be a figment of his imagination, because she doesn't really have any agency other than like, I want to cool off, which is, I don't think you can make a whole character out of that. So it's another, also just Sabrina had conflict. Sabrina had a love triangle and had conflict. There was enough there to put a plot together, where I don't think that Stalag, you could have had a plot of like, there's a German spy amongst our ranks, and who is it? You could have made an entire 90-minute plot. They kind of constantly zagged around it. I don't think 7-Year Itch really just fundamentally has it.
Stalag 17 could have been an amazing McCarthy era thriller about man against society, like a Twilight Zone kind of episode almost, because everybody turns on Holden's character and he refuses to budge. I mean, there's some good tension in those scenes, but as you say, they keep diffusing it again and again. And I think you're dead on. I think 7-Year Itch doesn't foundationally have the conflict to make it, more than an okay movie at best.
Keir, if someone's coming to Chicago, what's one place they have to visit?
Mike, no one should leave town without stopping by Exile in Bookville, the city's most beautiful and carefully curated bookstore. It's located on the second floor of the historic Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan Avenue.
Hey, didn't you write a book about the Fine Arts Building?
Why, yes, I did. It's called Chicago's Fine Arts Building, Music, Magic, and Murder, and you can find it at Exile.
Exile is the best. Wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling books, all lovingly selected by owners Javier and Kristen Ramirez. I guarantee you'll find something to read.
Their strong suit may be general and literary fiction, but I particularly love the middle room. That's where I find graphic novels, as well as books about art and music, cooking and cocktails, and our personal favorite, books about movies.
Javier and Kristen were kind enough to let the Filmographers recommend our favorites, so stop by and see what we selected.
I wrote a shelf talker for one of my all-time favorites, Kyle Buchanan's Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road.
They also stocked one of my faves, Sam Wasson's The Big Goodbye, Chinatown, and the Last Years of Hollywood.
Exile also has nonfiction, short stories, small press titles, and the very best in modern horror.
Listeners, if you're coming to Chicago, don't leave without visiting Exile in Bookville in the Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan Avenue. But you don't have to come to Chicago. You can find all they have to offer at exileinbookville.com.
Because there's more to life than movies. There are also books.
About movies.
With the film over budget, the 7-Year Itch would now need to gross over $4 million to cover the cost of prints and promotion and turn a profit. Fox, wanting to recoup sooner than later, pushed to release the film early. Remember earlier in the show when Axelrod insisted it couldn't come out while the Broadway show was still running? Well, at that time, they had set the date of February 1st, 1956, as being safe to release. But the play was still packing him in, so Axelrod had leverage, and Fox had to pay him $175,000 for his permission to release the film early. Here's to you, Mr. Axelrod. It's always nice when a writer gets paid.
Rare and nice, as both of us can attest, Keir. The film finally opened on June 1st, 1955, Monroe's birthday, at the Lowe's State in New York City. A 52-foot tall billboard of Monroe was so provocative, and Fox got so many complaints that they replaced it with a less explicit version. When Monroe saw it, she apparently said, "That's what they think of me?"
Her arrival at the premiere ran true to form. She was late. 10 minutes late, which irked Wilder, who noted, "Marilyn made a grand entrance, thereby taking everyone's attention away from my picture."
Also stealing attention, she was with DiMaggio, a development that surely excited the crowd. But it was not a reunion of star-crossed lovers. It was a publicity stunt. DiMaggio may have acted holier than thou, but he liked the spotlight too.
So, Mike, Wilder went out of his way to make a commercial picture from a successful play starring one of the hottest actresses in the world. What did the critics say?
Well, reviews were mixed. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times gave it a near pan, writing, quote, "But the simple fact is that Mr. Wilder has permitted Miss Monroe in her skin-fitting dresses and her frank gyrations to overpower Mr. Ewell."
He was a big Audrey Hepburn fan. I guess Marilyn Monroe was not his type.
No, too much gyrations, Keir. Crowther also noted, quote, "In the play, as we recall, the wishful thoughts of the fellow toward the lady were finally realized. In the picture, there is no such fulfillment. The rules of the production code have compelled a careful evasion that makes his ardor just a little absurd," end quote. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Variety liked it better, praising Ewell's performance, but noting that it contained only a fleeting resemblance to the play. In particular, the fact that the affair was consummated on stage, not literally. One surprising review came from none other than Francois Truffaut, who liked its deliberate, measured, finally very effective vulgarity and wrote Wilder, quote, "The libidinous old fox moves along with such incessant suggestiveness that 10 minutes into the film, we aren't sure what are the original or literal meanings of faucet, Frigidaire, under, above, soap, perfume, panties, breeze, or Rachmaninoff," end quote.
That's film criticism. And it was a financial success too. The worldwide gross after 1 year was $5.7 million, making it one of the highest grossing films of the year. By today's standards, that's not a lot, but the gross was more than double the budget plus cost overruns. One interesting note is that the film did not juice ticket sales on Broadway. The play closed just 10 weeks after the premiere on August 13th, 1955, after 1,141 performances. An incredibly successful run by any measure, although The 7-Year Itch was really a product of its time. Unlike many old Broadway hits, hell, unlike some films, including Sunset Boulevard, it never got a Broadway revival.
Axelrod did go back to Broadway later that year with Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, filmed with Jane Mansfield and Tony Randall a couple years later. He went on a nice run, adapting Bus Stop, which also starred Marilyn Monroe, and writing Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Manchurian Candidate, one of my favorites. Bizarrely, he tanked his Hollywood career with a 1966 turkey called Lord Love a Duck.
What I hear you saying is that Wilder needed a new collaborator for his next film.
Yeah, of course he did. But, and I love this, Axelrod and Wilder remained friends and were apparently collaborating on a new screenplay very late in life.
Aw, I love that too. Monroe made some changes, at least temporarily, after The 7-Year Itch. Tired of playing breathless sexpots, she broke things off with Natasha Lytess and left Hollywood for New York, where she began attending classes at the Actors Studio with Lee and Paula Strasberg. Fox lured her back in December 1955 by offering her a fat new contract and director approval, and yes, Billy Wilder was still on that list. Her new coach in Svengali was Paula Strasberg, who would be very much on set during the filming of Some Like It Hot.
Now, while you might think Wilder would have had mean things to say about working with Monroe, I mean, he wasn't nice to many people. He was often philosophical, even kind, while discussing Monroe's challenges. This is kind of a long quote, but it captures his attitude well. I had no problems with Monroe. It was Monroe who had problems with Monroe. She had trouble concentrating. There was always something bothering her. Directing her was like pulling teeth. But when you finished with her, when you had made it through 40 or 50 takes and put up with her delays, you found yourself with something unique and imitable. When the film was finished, you forgot your troubles with her. It's not that she was mean, it's just that she had no sense of time, nor conscious that 300 people had been waiting hours for her. However, she had a great sense of timing for herself. At times, she can do 3 pages of text without making a mistake. At other times, she had real mental blocks. She needed the best psychoanalyst or a team of psychoanalysts to figure out what was going on in her head.
I have 2 favorite Wilder quotes about Monroe. In one, he said he, quote, didn't realize what a disorganized person this was until I looked in the back of her car. It was like she threw everything in helter-skelter because there was a foreign invasion and the enemy armies were already in Pasadena. There were blouses lying there, and slacks, and dresses, girdles, old shoes, old plane tickets, old lovers, for all I know. And he definitely left the door open to working with her again. And once again, he said it perfectly. Marilyn Monroe was never on time, not once. Of course, I've got my Aunt Ida in Vienna, who was always on time for everything. But who would want to see her in a movie?
I think that the help that she got from the director added just a little bit. The help she got from her studies with various acting groups, I think only confused her. I think that she was born with something that is beyond directing. No matter how you suffered through those days and weeks and pulling those lines out like a dentist, they looked so absolutely and totally natural once you see them, and you loved on the screen, and that's the one that's the thing that survived.
Well, it's time to wrap up this episode with our latest Filmographers 5, a list of 5 films somehow related to the film we just discussed. And we've got a terrific list.
But first, if you've enjoyed today's show and you want to thank Keir and me for all the hard work we put into it, please visit patreon.com/the Filmographers podcast and join our community right now. Patreon is not only a way you can support us financially, it's the only place where you can get every single thing we share. If you support us at the $5 a month level, we'll send you a mug. Not ready to shell quite yet? Okay, join us for free so you can see everything we have to offer.
Not ready to join Patreon at all? Please, please, please review the show. The best place for the almighty algorithm is Apple Podcasts, but you can comment on a YouTube episode or even give us a rating on Spotify. Every interaction helps raise our profile and find more listeners. If you've been thinking about doing it, don't put it off any longer. Our fingers are crossed you'll give us 5 stars, like Derry Merbles, who wrote, well-researched, conversational, and focusing on each season on the works of a single director. What's not to love? Another great podcast to learn some film history. Or be like Kirsten, who wrote, a lot of podcasters simply watch a movie and then record a free-form discussion that lasts longer than the actual film. Mike and Keir do tons of homework, prepare carefully, and respect our time by talking about what matters most. A smart, polished show for fans of film history. Thanks, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate it. All right, it's time for the Filmographers 5, which you can, leave us a review saying how much you like the Filmographers 5. Perfect opportunity. Wilder and Axelrod got around the censors for the 7-year itch by eliminating all suggestion of an actual affair, instead putting Richard's lusts at these daffy fantasies, which got us thinking to other classic films that blur the line between fantasy and reality. Sometimes this is used for comedy, as in the 7-year itch, but more often it's just used for serious effect, and our list reflects that. Keir, please kick off our top 5 movies that blur the line between fantasy and reality.
Our fifth favorite movie that blurs the line between fantasy and reality is Terry Gilliam's 1991 fantasy comedy, The Fisher King, a movie I loved when it came out, but which I haven't seen since, so if it doesn't hold up, don't tell me. Gilliam is uneven, even when he's at his best, but this tale about two men trying to find their way through grief back to reality is both one of his most accessible and features some undeniably Gilliam-esque flair, like a hallucinated knight and a quest for a holy grail.
Our fourth favorite movie that blurs the line between fantasy and reality is Donnie, Darko, the 2001 cult classic directed by Richard Kelly. Who, you ask? True, Kelly didn't have much of a career, although I do love his sophomore effort, Southland Tales. I might be alone. That's okay. I have it on DVD, Blu-ray. I'll keep it going. But if you make one movie this memorable and this distinctive as Donnie Darko is, you're a success in my book. And it was his debut, about a kid who slowly disassociates from reality and whose madness is personified by a rabbit that will pretty much give you nightmares forever. This film's reception was tainted by a release date that came shortly after September 11th. Donnie's journey into darkness begins when a jet engine falls into his bedroom.
And our third favorite movie that blurs the line between fantasy and reality is American Psycho, directed by Mary Harron and released in 2000. The turn of the millennium was a good time to lose your grip on reality. Based on Bret Easton Ellis's famous novel about a finance bro serial killer, what makes this such a fun pick is that not everyone agrees his murders are fantasies. Harron is a director of underrated talent. Here, the fact that she doesn't tip her hand is exactly what gives this movie its power. And Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman, well, he absolutely slays.
And our second favorite movie that blurs the line between fantasy and reality is Pan's Labyrinth, a 2006 release from my main man, Guillermo del Toro. In his 4-star review, Roger Ebert called it one of the greatest of all fantasy films, and he's not wrong. Set during the murderous regime of Spain's Generalissimo Francisco Franco, it has an 11-year-old girl as its protagonist who lives in a world of real monsters and enters a labyrinth of imagined ones. Thematically rich and resisting easy understanding, Del Toro creates a world unlike any we've ever seen before in order to show us our own.
And our first favorite movie that blurs the line between fantasy and reality is Fight Club, David Fincher's 1999 adaptation of Chuck Palahniuk's novel of the same name. How rare is it to have a cult novel made into a cult movie? They both work. About an unnamed, depressed young guy who meets the charismatic Tyler Durden and joins a fight club with other alienated young men yearning to feel something, the film takes us on an exhilarating ride to a very surprising ending. Spoiler alert on this 27-year-old film, the narrator himself is Tyler Durden. Many critics hated it, and many viewers were offended, but the film still feels wildly urgent, and in an era where everybody's still worried about young men, it remains a fascinating voice in the conversation. And that's it for this episode of the Filmographers podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on our season-long exploration of the films of Billy Wilder.
Have a comment or suggestion? Want to share your thoughts on the 7-year itch or make a special request? We want to hear from you. Please. Lots of you listen, but nobody ever emails. You never call us. It's sad. Send us your thoughts. Just say hi. Send us a blank email. Doesn't matter. Send it to the filmographerspodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from you.
It's Saturday night and we're waiting alone by our inbox. Never rings.
Refresh.
Thank you, as always, to our fantastic producer, Kevin Lau, who makes our podcast sound and look like $1,000,000. Our theme music was composed and played by Gompson, who has a new album out. It's called Dwell On. It's great, and we encourage you to check it out on Bandcamp. Or if you must, listen first on Spotify. Our graphic design is by Cosmo Graff.
Join us next time when Billy Wilder either takes flight or crashes to Earth in the spirit of St. Louis.